So the best thing you can do when it comes to practicing is to get as clear as possible about where you're trying to get to and how you're going to get there. It's a little more nuanced than that. That's what we're going to talk about in today's lesson. So first of all, when it comes to figuring out where you're trying to get to, you got to pick something. And something, not some things. And we all have a million things we want to learn how to do. Pick one for now. If you can get good at one thing, you're building the tools and the muscles to get good at other things. So pick one thing and get as clear and specific about that as possible. And it can be something with a long term to it, but try to figure out what that one specific thing is and define it as carefully as you can. As far as, I want to be able to play in this style, or I want to be able to play 10 specific songs in this genre, or something on that level of specificity. And then don't worry about the time frame. That comes next. So if you know what this thing is, now you can start to break it apart and go, what do I need to be able to do that thing? And we can take that and make it more specific, less vague, by thinking about three things: technique, knowledge, and repertoire. So technique, what are you going to have to be able to do if it's a fingerstyle thing you're working on? What do you have to be able to do? Is it alternating thumb? Is it steady bass? Does it have a walking bass? Does it have a shuffle groove? What kinds of things do you need to be able to do? And how do you need to coordinate your fingers with that thumb groove? And then in terms of what kind of understanding or knowledge do you need, what's going on rhythmically? What kinds of things do you need to be able to coordinate? What kinds of chord voicings or tunings do you need to be fluent in if it's an open tuned thing? What kind of scales are you going to need to know? If you're working on playing blues, is it blues scales in open position? Is it major pentatonic scales? What's the stuff? What kind of chord voicings? Maybe it's triads you need to know, seventh chords. Figure out what the materials are so that you can be working on getting that into your fingers, into your ears, and into your brain. And then finally, what's the repertoire? What's the ultimate goal here? What are you trying to be able to play? What are some specific songs? What are some, how specific can you get about the genre? If it's blues, blues is really huge. There's a big difference between saying you want to be able to play like John Hurt and saying you want to be able to play like Robert Johnson. So is it more in the Delta blues? Is it more in the sort of Piedmont and finger picking style, alternating thumb finger picking style? Is it just that maybe it's not tunes? Maybe you just want to be able to sit and play, to be able to do something that's a little more improvised. What is the genre goal? And in fact, having that genre goal in place will probably inform some of the specifics of the technique and the materials that you need to be able to do. Now, if you're specific about the one thing you want to get better at, and you have thought about it in terms of technique and fingerboard knowledge and repertoire, that should help you get to the place where you know, when I wake up tomorrow or the next time I sit down and practice, I need to work on these specific things. And the reason I initially said don't worry about the time frame is you have to be able to simultaneously hold these two things in your head. One is this ultimate place you're trying to get to, and the other is what you got to do the next time you sit down to play. Because if you think too much about the ultimate destination, you'll feel completely overwhelmed. If you only think about, well, I got to sit down and practice because practicing is what you do, without any consideration for where you're trying to get to, you'll practice, but you won't get any further towards the place you're trying to get to. So by working backwards from the biggest part of the picture down through the specific repertoire you want to be able to do and the specific kind of technique and knowledge that will require, you can then get to a place where you can go, okay, well, here's the first song I'm trying to get to, and it requires me to work in this key with this particular groove and learn these particular voicings and this specific melodic information, whether that's a scale or the melody to the tune or whatever. And out of all that, you can then go, well, what's going on in the first few measures? And that way you can sit down at the beginning of a week and go, well, here's what I got to do today. And by breaking it down to that extent, you can then look at it as, well, I have a half an hour today. This is how I'm going to work on it right now. Now, the details are in that space between the second and third step, between getting clear about what it's going to take to do what you want to do and that moment that you sit down to practice next. And that's where it can get really fuzzy, and that's where you can sit down to practice and feel like the practicing isn't getting you anywhere, or that you sat and played stuff you already knew but you didn't get any better, those kinds of things. And so I think there are 4 things that can help to remedy that. The first is to have a kind of a roadmap. The second is to have a time to practice. The third thing is to have a place to practice. And the fourth thing is to have a specific practice window. So let me explain what I mean by those 4 things. So a roadmap is having a set of steps, like what order should you learn? Let's say you're trying to learn a set of songs. What order should you learn them in, from easier to more difficult? Or, if you're trying to learn to improvise in a particular style, some kind of insight into what are some of the typical things that go on idiomatically in this style. Do people play in open position or up the neck? Do they play with a certain kind of phrasing? Do they use certain kinds of scales? Do they use certain kinds of techniques and articulations and all of that? So that part is something that you may need to get from outside of your own brain, right? A book, a course, a video. I've used all kinds of stuff like that. I love having someone else's roadmap that I can apply myself to say, oh, this is the order the material comes in. We're going to do this first, then this, then that, then this other thing. And that's something that you can apply yourself to. Having a time means, if at all possible, having a time when you practice so that you have that time set aside and oh, I always practice first thing in the morning, or I always practice when I've got everything else done for the day, whatever it might be. Any way you can make it into sort of an appointment for yourself will increase the likelihood that you'll show up for it. A place means, if possible, if you can have your stuff set up so that it's easy to pick up your instrument and practice. It's as simple as the difference between, can you leave your instrument out on a stand versus is it in the guitar case? It's just, the idea of taking away whatever friction there is between you and doing the thing. And then a window means it's not an open-ended thing to practice. It might be 15 minutes or half an hour. Having it be a window does a couple things. It makes it a little more urgent when you sit down. It's like, well, I better get started. I only have a half an hour. And it also helps you keep the expectations down of how much you're going to get done. So you don't sit down for one practice session thinking you're going to master something. You're just trying to make a little more progress. You're just trying to get a little more insight into what it is you're learning and trying to play. And by keeping it in that window, ironically, it actually helps you stay cool and stay calm enough to do the work that's right in front of you, even when it's challenging, knowing that you're going to show up and do a little bit more on it the next time. And that's really it. That kind of specificity can make a huge difference. That and this last thought, which is playing and practicing are 2 different things. And they are 2 sides of the same coin. They both help and reinforce each other. But just be clear when you're practicing and when you're playing. And that idea of having a time and a window for your practicing can really help, because if you're clear that this is when I practice and this is how long I practice, then as soon as that's done for the day, everything else that happens that day is playing. And that way you can still have room for the more intuitive part of yourself to come out and just goof around and try things and experiment and find things, and maybe even realize like, oh, that's how that thing I worked on is helping. Or, oh, this is the thing I still can't do. Let me put that on the agenda as something that I've got to go back and tighten up and work on and figure out a way to do better. Now, of course, I teach repertoire inside my membership, the Fingerstyle 5, and the focus is on working backwards from that repertoire and saying, okay, we want to play tunes like this. Here are the kinds of right hand technique we need to work on. Here are the kind of voicings we need to know. Here is how to start putting these tunes together in a systematic way that you can repeat over and over as you learn additional tunes, as you put new songs into your repertoire, as you have new songs you want to improvise on or arrange. So if you'd like to learn more about the Fingerstyle 5 and how it can help your playing, go to the link below or the link on screen to check that out. If you've got a question or a comment about today's lesson, please leave it down below. I would love to hear from you. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.